Hi everyone, Shalom. How are you doing? Where will you be for Rosh Hashanah? You're welcome to share the discussion group. Of course, only if you'd like. Where are you planning to be eating, praying, with whom, if at all? Now today we'll have two videos. The first one, which the present one, is a response to the discussion and an explanation of Rabbi Zvi Yehuda Kook's perspective of the Holocaust, the Shoah. The second one we will be focusing on Mizmor Yutet, Mizmor. We'll also speak about the word Mizmor, Mizmor Yutet, Psalms 19, or the 19th hymn, for the state of Israel, Mizmor Yutet Lemdinat Israel. Earlier today, as I was unpacking one of the boxes from our move after several years in Singapore, I came across my copy of Lenetivot Israel, you can see here, which I received as a bar mitzvah gift. So this is one of the two volumes of Lenetivot Israel that I have um, ever since my bar mitzvah. And here's the picture. I also found a few other interesting things, which I'll share with you in the future when timing is right in terms of the themes, the topics of the classes. So, a few words about the discussion. I've read through all of your comments. Maybe a brief, maybe briefly, just to summarize some of the main ideas, some of the questions that emerged. We saw um, recurring themes of continuity, right, versus change. So we have this continuity versus change, the role of institution versus ideas, the shift from mysticism to concrete action, the building of a movement and a civic contract with the state, and of course, the different historical context in which the father and son lived. Several of you also raised open questions. Does transformation strengthen or distort continuity? And what really defines a true successor? So it's worth noting that both Rav Zvi Yehuda's students, right, his followers and scholars, regard him as the clear successor to Rav Kook. Naturally, they point to the difference between thought and action, as we mentioned, and to the very different historical and cultural context in which the two lived. But still, Rab Tzvi Yehuda is seen as the successor, not in the sense of mere imitation, but as someone who develops, leads, and speaks in his father's name. The important question for us is in which ways he continued, deepened, and refined his father's thought, and in which respects, if any, he acted in opposition to what his father has envisioned. Now, for now, I want to leave this as an open question. So, before moving on to the main topic of this video, Rav Zvi Yehuda Kook's perspective on the Shoah and the Holocaust, just one more note: the course is structured so that we learn the material together through these videos. I do recommend additional reading, but it is meant for enrichment and broader context rather than as a strict requirement. Some of the readings I already have scanned, and some I uploaded, some I will upload for you, while others I do not yet have in digital form. I asked the administrative staff of Gratz to help with scanning, I'm waiting to hear back from them, and I'll update you as soon as I know more. This is the first time this course is been being delivered here in Gratz. So yeah, we're the pioneers, and some materials still need to be digitalized, scanned. So I'll keep you posted. In any case, just to remind you, I'm available by email and also WhatsApp. My number appears on the final slide. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me with any questions or concerns. And now let's focus on Rav Tzvi Yehuda and the Holocaust, the Shoah. So as we know, and I think we even have here in class, if I remember correctly, um, at least one or two of you wrote or writing about the Holocaust, and you can probably teach us better than I can about different approaches and perspectives and reactions, theological reactions, theological approaches to the Holocaust, during the Holocaust, post-Holocaust. And as we know, for many Jews, the Holocaust shattered not only families and communities, but also the very foundations of faith, of emunah. And the question it raised, the questions, right, plural, the questions it raised were not abstract, right? They were raw, urgent, deeply personal, forcing believers to wrestle with the nature of God in the face of unfathomable evil, the Holocaust, in which one third of the Jewish people were systematically murdered, posed searing theological questions for the believer. Did God will to save and yet lack the power? Or was God able but chose for some hidden reason to turn away? Now here I just shared with you two of many uh, books and approaches to this. I even though each of these books takes the question, the discussion to another direction, a different direction. I like these books very much, both of them. I have them, and I like returning to them and reading in them, immersing myself in them. So yeah, we have here. We're not going to speak about them, definitely not today. Rav Eliezer Berkovich. By the way, Rav Berkovich's book. I might even have the Hebrew version here somewhere in my room. It was translated to Hebrew, and we have Hans Jonas. Also, I think translated into Hebrew, although I do not know if I have the Hebrew version, the Hebrew translation. Now, the God to whom Jews direct their prayers 3 times a day is not imagined as detached or meaningless, right? I want to us to be reminded of this. The heart of the Tanakh, the Bible, and the Talmud stands the conviction that there is good and evil. ראה אנוכי נותן לפניכם היום ברכה וקללה. We have tov, we have ra, right? We have blessing, we have the curse, we have the good, we have the evil. We have reward and punishment. והיה אם שמוע תשמעו. ואם לא, and if not, if you will obey, if you will listen to God, and if not. And it's not right. This is something that is quite straightforward, and God hears. It says God hears prayer and can work miracles. Shomea tefillah, shomea tefillah. Okay, so can any sin possibly justify a punishment like the Shoah, like the Holocaust. So some religious leaders said yes. Among them, we have famously Rav Yoel Teitelboim, the Satmar Rebbe, right? We know, again, this is not a, we're not learning here about the Shoah. This is just kind of somewhat of an introduction to Rabbi Zvi Yehuda Kook, but he speaks about Zionism as a cause. The Belzer Rebbe, Reb Aaron Roth, and others, yet many refuse to provide any explanation at all, insisting that none could ever suffice, right? So some like Rav Berkovich counseled silence, though even they later spoke. This is also interesting. So they did counsel silence, but they did later speak cautiously, yes, from a place of deep hesitation. Forces of evil, understood as ontologically distinct from God, not used. You can see this in writings of Professor Shalom Rosenberg, for instance. And among the various approaches, there is another striking one, the view of the Holocaust as a kind of surgical operation, a surgery, the surgery metaphor. And I have found this metaphor in the writings of at least three modern thinkers, Rav Eliyahu Bochko, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and Rav Zvi Yehuda Kook. Each has nuances and differences, but all speak in terms of surgery. Hanituach, Hanituach HaElohi. According to this view, the Shoah, the Holocaust, was an unbearable event, yes, yet one with a defined purpose to heal the Jewish people in the long run. It was not a punishment for a concrete sin. Um, for punishment presumes proportionality, and no sin could ever justify or explain the Holocaust. But if it's surgery, proportionality is not the point. A surgeon does not rejoice in the pain of the patient. The pain is a tragic but necessary byproduct of a greater goal, healing. I have gathered for you several of Rav Zvi Yehuda's writings and talks, and I want to present his position on the Holocaust. He clearly expresses hesitation. There's something very important to note and to know and to remember, stating that we cannot fully comprehend God, yet at the same time, he insists we must try. His basis for this is the verse, Binu Shno Dovado, Zechor Yemot Olam. Zechor Yemot Olam, Binu Shno Dovado. Remember the days of old, consider the years of age past. From Deuteronomy, from Sefer Dvarim. In other words, we must strive to discern the hand of God in history and to uncover the divine process hidden within concrete events. So for him, this is not justification, nor even a satisfying explanation. It does not answer the anguish, but what he does see is surgery. He does not claim to know why it took precisely this form, or why one person perished in one way and another in a different way. Rather, he argues that this was a divine operation necessary for the life of the national body. This is very important. Haguf, haklali, the collective body, the national body, and ultimately for its benefit. It was not about the sins of individuals, but about the condition of the people as a collective body. The patient on the operation table was the national organism, the Jewish collective. The purpose was to bring the people out of exile, of galut, and into the redemption phase. In his words, exile brought both physical and spiritual depletion. He writes, I'll read Hebrew, then translate, בגולה אנו שארית של ישראל, מפוזרים ומפורדים, בהיותנו בין 70 הזאבים. מצוקת הגלות העבירה את האדם מישראל על דעתו, על הכרת עצמיותו. So he says, in exile, we are only a remnant of Israel, She'erit Israel, scattered and fragmented, living among 70 wolves. The distress of exile has driven Jews to forget themselves, to lose awareness of their very identity. Therefore, he explains, God decided that the time had come to end the exile. Yet this faced resistance from the Jewish people themselves because, as he writes, and I'm quoting, Jews fell in love with exile and refused to ascend to the land of Israel, alot le'eretz Israel. But exile cannot continue forever. End of quote. So, because of this, clinging to the tar of exile, zefet galut, God was compelled to perform surgery, an agonizing divine operation of separation from exile. And did the operation succeed? And Rabbi Zvi Yehuda's view, yes, the Jewish people were severed from exile and established a state, the state of Israel. In that sense, the surgery fulfilled its purpose. The surgery, right? We have the surgery approach is not only discussed today among scholars, but was also taken up by Rav Zvi Yehuda's students, the followers. For example, and here you can see one example. I took a photo from the book Yesh Shoalim of one of Rav Zvi Yehuda's disciples, Rabbi Zalman Baruch Melamed. You can remember this name. There are a few important, maybe we should have a map. What do you say? You tell me if this is going to be useful to have like a map of, I don't know, maybe 10 or 20, the closest followers of Rav Zvi Yehuda. Most of them still live today. They're in their 70s, 80s, and even 90s. So what, Rav Zalman Baruch Melamed is one of them. And in his book, Yesh Shoalim, is telling his students on Holocaust Memorial Day, right? It's Chodesh Nisan, Kaf Zayin Nisan, 27th of Nisan, 1994. You can see Yom HaShoah Tafshinun Dalet. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, just translating part of it. He says, Rabbi Zvi Yehuda saw the Holocaust as a terrible and dreadful operation, painful and shocking. Yet, with all its horrific suffering, the purpose of the surgery was to restore the body, to halt the slide down the slope of exile. to annul the very reality of exile and to rebuild Israel anew in the land where they are rooted. He teaches us that these terrible calamities were the birth pangs of redemption. Chivlei leda, chivlei geula, the birth pangs of Messiah, chivlei Mashiach, which come for the sake of redemption. End of quote. But here lies something very delicate theologically, which most people overlook. The question I want to ask is, in Rav Zvi Yehuda's perspective, how is this operation actually carried out? And the way I see it, Rav Zvi Yehuda's teaching implies that the operation takes place through the absence of God. So it's an operation, it's a divine operation, but it takes place through absence. And here I follow, in some ways, Chagai Stamler, who I mentioned in the previous session, who pointed out a dimension in Rav Zvi Yehuda Kook's writings that has largely been ignored by scholarship. The motive of the departure of the Shekhinah, withdrawal of the Shekhinah. In one of the essays in Lintivot Israel, right? We spoke about Lintivot Israel. So there is an essay on the essence of the synagogue, Batei Knesset, and it's written right after the Holocaust. Rav Zvi Yehuda describes how when the Jewish people went into exile, the Shekhinah, right? The divine femininity went with the people of Israel, went with the Jewish people. So the Shekhinah accompanies them. And this is rooted in Kabbalah. Now, if again, I'm trying to cover a lot here, and I mean, if you feel like we want to discuss more in depth the notion of Shekhinah and exile and redemption and the Shekhinah symbols, I'll be happy to do so. Okay. Now the verse comes from Proverbs. כציפור נודדת מקינה, כן איש נודד ממקומו. Like a bird that strays from its nest is a man who strays from his home. So the bird is the Shekhinah. And the bird wanders from its nest. And the Shekhinah settles in the synagogues and Batei Midrash, the halls, the houses of studying Torah, which serve as miniature sanctuaries, Mikdash Me'at. And this happens while the people of Israel, the Jews, are in Galut and exile. This is not only Rabbi Zvi Yehuda Kook. There are many sources to this in Jewish tradition. Again, if you're interested, I'm happy to provide more on this. Imo anochi betzara, right? There's the verse that God is with, accompanies the people of Israel while they're in exile, and the manifestation of God that's in charge, that is with the people of Israel, is Shekhinah, or Malchut, kingship, the 10th, the lowest sphira, the godly emanation. But when the time for redemption arrives, and this is Rav Zvi Yehuda's philosophy, when the time for redemption arrives, the Shekhinah departed from exile and returned to the land of Israel. There is a time where the bird is called back to its nest, the land of Israel. Now, please note carefully. It was not the state of Israel, Medinat Israel, that began the process of redemption, Atchalta Geula. Rather, redemption itself gave rise to the state of Israel. Redemption came first, the time of redemption, hence the birth of the state, not the other way around. Rabbi Zvi Yehuda writes, and I'm quoting, where there are no dwelling places of the Shekhinah, and no Shekhinah in them, it becomes clear that there is no place of existence for Israel in all these surroundings. End of quote. The Shekhinah uproots itself from exile and comes to the land of Israel. Thus, there is no longer divine protection for the Jewish people in exile. And let me read to you one more quote of Rabbi Zvi Yehuda, Hebrew than English, and I'm reading the Hebrew because I want you also to get used to Rabbi Zvi Yehuda's Hebrew. And even if you're not fluent in Hebrew, you can still, I think, or hope, can get some of the music, some of the um, terminology that Rabbi Zvi Yehuda uses, and it is quite unique. יד השם נטויה עלינו מתוך תשפוכת הדמים, תמרות העשנים, פרפורי הייסורים, העלאות האישים, הקרבות הנשמות, אשר עם נטילת קרקע הגלות וסילוק השכינה ממנה, ומביאה אותנו גם בציצית ראשנו לקוממות גאולתנו ופדות נפשנו בחזרת שכינתנו ציונה. Translation: the hand of the Lord is stretched over us through the bloodshed, the pillars of smoke, the convulsions of suffering, the offering of sacrifices. The souls surrendered as with the removal of the ground of exile and the withdrawal of the Shekhinah from it, bringing us, even by the hair of our heads, to the exaltation of our redemption and the deliverance of our souls through the return of His Shekhinah to Zion. End of quote. The people of Israel were forced into redemption, compelled to rise up because they refused to rise of their own accord. They rose only because the Shekhinah left and everything collapsed. I want to end the first video here. I think there's much to say about this, much to think about, to reflect, comprehend. Even though the question this week, the discussion is not about the Holocaust, I invite you, I ask you to share also reflections if you have. I mean, I personally would be really interested to hear, right? So we had this from what, so if you search in Google, you find Rabbi Zvi Yehuda, you find the surgery, Mashal HaNituach. And people like Professor Ishai Rosen-Tzvi wrote papers on this, very, very good paper in Hebrew. If any of you want, I can share the Hebrew. It's a very good academic paper in Hebrew by Professor Rosen-Tzvi. And others wrote about this, but again, you will probably not find any reference to this withdrawal of the Shekhinah and surgery by absence of God. The surgeon is not there. The surgery takes place because and this is a really, I mean, theologically, who is doing the surgery, right? Who is doing this? Who's doing this operation? Is it Hashem? Is it God? Or maybe God is allowing it by not being there, not looking after the people of Israel because it's time to move on. And Rabbi Zvi Yehuda says, God asked in many different ways, Jews, it's time to come back home to your homeland where you're rooted. It's time for the bird to return to its nest. And if that does not help, and if people are too attached to their countries where they live in, then the bird just departs, and then it enables the Shoah to occur, to happen, to take place. We'll stop here and we'll continue now with the second video discussing Mizmor Yutet למדינת Israel, which had great influence on Gush Emunim and the settlement movement.